Yes, an Overwatch video in 2019, that's what this channel needed. Christ, did this game really come out a little under 3 years ago? I think the best way to begin things is to set some general rules as to how this video is gonna go. First and foremost, yeah, you guessed right that I'm gonna be comparing Overwatch and Team Fortress 2 a bit over the course of this, which I know is kind of a meme at this point, but the comparison I believe is important to what I say here. Not only because I played a lot of both Overwatch and TF2, but the two games are the most comparable to each other and present really contrasting flaws, where Overwatch has earned widespread popularity and long-term support but has a problematic design core, and Team Fortress 2 has this timeless and well thought out design core but has been handled incompetently long-term, which makes it struggle in today's limelight. Its use isn't to say this game is bad because it's not exactly like this other game I like, but rather so I can provide an immediately understandable example to illustrate any points I make and not be so vague about it. Second thing is that while I of course try to do research in the most critical of areas, as this video is mostly my opinion on the matter and not every inch of the game's development process is publicly available, this video mostly consists of just my speculation of what's going on from public and community resources, implications brought on by Overwatch's ongoing support, combined with my own personal experience as an end user. So don't take this video as gospel really, but rather form your own view around what it is I tell you. Even if it's a bad view. Thirdly, this video is focused entirely on the design of Overwatch, not external areas surrounding the game, which means no talking directly about the game's community or monetization, because it's ultimately irrelevant to what I want to discuss. Even though the loot boxes are certainly some bullshit, but shh, apparently we're not allowed to acknowledge that Blizzard are the other half of Activision or something. It's just something we sweep under the rug because we like their games. Fourthly, the fact that I like the game, guys. Please don't hurt me. This video is basically tough love. I may not play it as often as I used to, but Overwatch is one of my favorite games for reasons both recreational and personal, and the main reason I'm making this video is to generally raise awareness of core issues that everyone needs to keep in mind if Blizzard wishes to either ditch the game entirely in favor of a new shooter IP or make a successor to it, so that we can be more critical of the team and ensure actions are done in future for the better. Overwatch was actually the game that got me into looking at online shooters this way, so without the game's existence, God knows if I'd be making this kind of video or even continuing to do YouTube in the first place, so hey, that's pretty cool I guess. Anyway, fun fact, I've been a Symmetra main basically the entire time the game's been out. I actually made a video essay on Symmetra before rebooting, which is extremely outdated at this point, don't watch it. Back in April 2018, I was told that Nathan Grayson over at Kotaku was doing an article on Symmetra, her community stigma, and her upcoming rework. Very excited to jump onto this, I plugged his tweet over to the Symmetra main subreddit, the sub-equivalent of gay Twitter, and wrote this lengthy-ass screed to Nathan with my general thoughts, mostly writing about the lack of focus on Symmetra as a builder and how I can't really blame the community for disliking her if the Overwatch team have no clue what to do with her because they didn't go the extra mile in planning her class role, which we'll get to later. My contribution didn't get featured in the article, which is no disrespect to Nathan considering it was really long and didn't correlate with what everyone else was saying at the time, so it's not exactly worth featuring. But when the article did get published, I was surprised to see a headline that truly summed up our lack of critical analysis with the game. Overwatch's Symmetra mains agree. The problem is other players. Okay. I'ma let you guys in on a little secret with online games. See, player-base related issues such as the players of a game being highly toxic is never something that spawns into existence on its own. The toxicity fairy didn't come down one day and randomly decide to spend the next 10 years hidden inside Overwatch's disproportionate legs. Toxicity in a gaming community is nothing more than a symptom, caused by legitimate issues with the game and its design. There needs to be a reason contained within the game itself why players are shitty when they play it in particular. And it might have to do with being a game with numerous structural conflicts that can never stay consistent for 5 seconds, has matches that slow to a crawl with minimal effort, and has more steamrolling going on than any other multiplayer versus game I've ever played. I mean, there's a reason why, unlike Overwatch, I can lose in a game of Team Fortress 2, Titanfall 2, Apex Legends, or even bloody Rec Room and still be having fun with the games rather than getting upset and closing it down for the day. I'm not calling the waiter over just because I'm a naturally shitty person, okay? But it's just when I told him there was a fly in my soup, it took him at least 3 months for him to give me new soup. And when he gave me new soup, he decided to buff the fly. Overwatch is a game with problems that have led to numerous players leaving unsatisfied, and in fact it sucks that the game's cool to hate now because it means this video won't be controversial by the time it comes out, so I'll probably get less views. But when we discussed it, we fought the wrong battles, we talked about the wrong things, it was kinda too far gone in the first place, and the game just can't be fixed retrospectively through some mildly sufficing actions like balance the heroes better, which basically means buff my mains, or delete all of the toxic players, which basically means ban that paying customer that just wanted to play Bastion on quick play. In essence, we were misguided, and the true issue is Overwatch as the fundamental mechanical game that we're playing from the moment it was scrawled together out of some scrapped MMO or whatever it was, and turned into a game that seems perfectly fine at first, but then it gets more inconsistent and frustrating the more you sink into it, and you see it in such a state of disrepair that it will never be fixed. Ever. Now, Overwatch was everyone's darling, including mine, so for the sake of being fair as well as shielding my own butthole before it's patted into oblivion, I think it's only fair that I start things from what I like most about the game and why. The obvious reason being that, well, it's really damn fun, guys, no question. This was one of my go-to video games in general for so long. It's easy to dive into, it's basically the perfect game when it comes to teaching new players and giving them information, it's satisfying to play well, and the additional modes give you room for experimentation. What's not to love? It's also oozing with charm. Can't forget about that. Lore's kind of all over the place, and the characters are just tropes with central characteristics added in much later. Like, yeah, I know the game came out 2 years ago, but why don't we give D.Va PTSD for funsies? But it's all still nice in the presentation department, and feels like it was put together by people with a legitimate passion and love for the game, even though there should definitely be more top representation. Basically, every male character in Overwatch except Torbjorn is a bottom, and you can fight me on that. Doomfist is probably a verse, though. And it's just one of my best multiplayer with friends experiences I've played. So many of my friends I don't think I'd ever really get to know if we weren't playing Overwatch together the months after it came out. The moment I started getting to know someone new back in 2016, I would ask if they played Overwatch or recommend the game to them, because it is the ultimate icebreaker and it gets conversations going as you play. But you notice a lot of that mostly stems from casual play. I've played enough Overwatch that I can play at a competent level with my brain switched off. It's basically the perfect game to play if you need to catch up with podcasts or pass the time, but in my opinion, see guys, it's not that hard. I can't take competitive Overwatch seriously. I couldn't before and I couldn't now. Not just because I'm bad at it, and I am really bad at it, mind you, but because in the world of competitive shooter design, Overwatch is that one kid with the runny nose who keeps tripping over his shoelaces alike to Splatoon, and at least Splatoon ended up learning to at least fetch a hanky when it came back after summer vacation. Video essays are perfect for conveying the idea of the thing you like actually sucks, so here's mine. Overwatch is not ready for competitive play. It never was, and as far as I'm concerned, never will be. It's in much too deep with its fundamentals that I don't think it can be brought to an acceptable condition through mere tweaking long after the game's been launched. And I think after achieving my silver portrait, suddenly not playing the game for months on end, the 2018 winter event allegedly being the least played event in the game's life cycle, and seeing news on the game come and go quicker than 76's interest in women, I think things have mellowed out a little to make a long overdue post-mortem. Not for the game itself, as it seems to still be going strong in its own bubble, but a post-mortem of my interest, hope, and faith in Overwatch. It all started way back when the game was being developed. Again, this is just speculation from publicly available resources, but take a listen of these developer commentary tracks from TF2 with regards to how they designed their classes.
The Pyro is designed to be the best short-range combat class, aimed at encouraging players to adopt an ambush style of play.
The Scout is designed for players who are able to rapidly move around while tracking their target. Where other combat classes rely on high amounts of damage, the Scout relies on his high movement speed and double jump ability to dodge enemy fire.
The Soldier is a core combat class featuring versatile movement and a terrific long-range damage capability. He's designed to be comfortable in almost any combat situation and to be the best long-range anti-sentry gun class.
So we have a lot to unpack here. With these tracks, notice how they didn't just go over general characteristics and mechanics surrounding a playable character, but they also went over each class's established rock-solid role that must never be tampered with no matter the circumstances. As a hypothetical non-quote to abridge everything, it's basically, here's our design philosophy of how this character works into the game, and if we are to tweak or further develop this character, we should keep that philosophy in mind to make sure we're being consistent. And regardless of if that remains true in TF2 due to the enigma that is unlockable weapons, it's still something that was considered in its development and is a common factor of discussing the day-to-day amongst developers and fans. Establishing a role and playstyle for a character is important in order to find a reference point when developing them, so you don't just 180 and turn them into a completely different character by accident by giving them changes they really didn't need. And unfortunately, you don't really get that with Overwatch, which is especially problematic when TF2 was built as a casual game slowly sculpted to be more serious, but Overwatch was clearly intended to be competitive from the very moment it reached the public eyes, so that should have, in theory, given the team a leg up with regards to how they construct their game. But looking at the way the heroes are conceptualized, it all comes across as way sloppier by comparison. Less like developers meticulously constructing a competitive game, and more like a school project group with markers on a sheet of paper. To pick an example out of thin air, Pharaoh was pitched as having a jetpack, having a rocket launcher, being able to launch napalm. It's already insulting enough that the concept name for the character was just Rocket Dude. Like, you're not going into enough detail here for your playable character in a competitive versus shooter that might get put up on a tier list. It's not not even something tactical like, I don't know, Enforcer or Trapper. It's just, yeah, basically, we wanted to make a dude with a rocket because dudes with rockets are cool. Did we ever tell you about the hamster that escaped from containment because it was being experimented on along with a fucking gorilla? I mean, what is Farah's role? Is she supposed to be a generalist that's used in most situations, or a high skill ceiling specialist? How do you want her to engage with enemies? How do you want enemies to engage with her? What combat situations would her abilities and mechanics work best with? Does she have any weaknesses? What are her intended tiers and matchups? These are but a few of the elements that, to our knowledge, were most likely glossed over when designing her final iteration, so it's all up in the air instead of us knowing clear cut. Farah is not a class, she's not a role, she's just a character with mechanics, and the knock-on effect is that there aren't any rules in place that prevent her from being changed to a different role entirely, or for an adjustment to be made outside of the game that gives her an advantage or disadvantage. This is what I'll be referring to as the Rocket Dude principle, but despite that name, Farah isn't the best example because, well, she's a pretty straightforward DPS that hasn't changed much over the years. The two most damning cases of this are in fact D.Va and Symmetra. When I first played D.Va in the beta before any major reworks, her role seemed really clear to me. She was an agile tank whose job is to overextend and act as a nuisance to the enemy team. She wasn't that effective with actually dispatching anyone, but that's fine because her role was to distract and harass those in the back to keep the enemy team away from her teammates and the objective. She was a really well-rounded tank with a clear idea of what to do and how to engage with the match. You really need to keep note of something like that because you don't really get enough to go on by just making a hero with lots of health and just slapping tank onto it. That's just not good enough and leads to inconsistencies with what a tank is in the game. Hence why Roadhog has been a very debatable tank as of late because his high DPS and lack of defense or supporting mechanics implies that he's only a tank because he's a big dude with a fuck ton of health. But what I all said just now about D.Va was just my interpretation of how she was supposed to work back when the game came out. But if for the sake of this example we were to assume this was their full design intention with D.Va, their full design philosophy of how she works, that would mean that if she got reworked or rebalanced, they would ensure that playstyle was still the core of D.Va and balance around that, which they were on the right track with. Reworking her defense matrix, increasing her health, nerfing damage, nerfing ult charge, still keeping intact the agile little harasser that makes a conga line out of the enemy team. But oh dear, next thing we know, September 19th, 2017, defense matrix nerfed to oblivion, D.Va can shoot while maneuvering, and she has a new offensive ability that dishes out a ridiculous amount of DPS, coupled with an earlier change that gave her more standard health but less armor, which means D.Va now plays like an attack-heavy DPS with limited defense options to ensure she has restraint and requires backup from her team to engage in harassment. If, again, we assume her playstyle before was how she was supposed to be designed, well, why? It raises a lot of questions. Why nerf her health bar if she's supposed to be a pest at the front lines? Why nerf defense matrix if her health was also nerfed and her existing role is already going to be harder to carry out? Why give her a DPS ability if that's not her fucking job and doesn't work with her pre-existing role? To which you probably say something like, well, maybe your interpretation of D.Va's playstyle was wrong and this current form was what they were going for all along, but if that's the case, then what were they doing with her earlier builds when she didn't possess those characteristics? No matter how you spin it, it all comes across as them having zero idea what they wanted D.Va to be this entire time because of how 180 the changes are. Changes like this are so unnatural and contrasting and clash with previously set up rules that I don't believe for a second that they had a plan when implementing D.Va into the game. And it's just starting to make sense why so many D.Va mains, including some I personally know, have stopped playing the game because the hero and class role they enjoy playing basically got removed from the game. I don't care what mental gymnastics are thrown at me, D.Va basically got removed from the game and replaced with a doppelganger of the same name. This argument is especially true for Symmetra 3.0. Now, for the record, I personally love the new implementations of Symmetra's current build, but I can't blame anyone who stopped playing her after all these changes because she's basically a new hero entirely. Not just in terms of kit, but her entire role and how she engages with the game, because like D.Va, there's no pre-planned consistency to Symmetra's design. She's a builder with a beam weapon, but where does that get us? I want to ask what Symmetra's role is, but I feel like not even the team knows because they rolled out not one, but 2 patches that changed her role entirely. I like playing her and I think she's fine in the fun, casual clusterfuck mass the game makes, but she is just one of the many amalgamations of stacking random mechanics together with little regard for how it all mixes together into one class role in a game, and it's no wonder that Symmetra is never competitively viable, when the team probably don't even know what a competitively viable Symmetra even is by design. Instead of pitching these two from a game design role standpoint as a frontline harasser and a utilitarian support, then giving them mechanics around that, the team were most likely too preoccupied with pitching them from a mechanical standpoint as a mech with a cannon that flies and a lady with a beam who builds turrets. Which sounds like enough at face value, but when you think about it, is actually really vague, and I can't blame the team at this rate for not having any any idea how to balance and rework their heroes. I actually feel sorry for them at this point because of how irreversible their actions are. The Rocket Dude philosophy taken up by the Overwatch team was a broken mistake that has led to heroes so inconsistently designed they've implemented themselves into a corner, and to fix the game will either need a damn miracle or to dump the entire thing and start again. What's Junkrat's role? What's Hanzo's, Mercy's, McCree's? Nobody has any clue, and as such they get knocked about all over the place in the patch notes because there aren't any fine rules in place of what they do other than really surface level stuff like they deal damage, they heal, or they use this weapon. Next thing we know, a rifle-wielding hero is implemented that paves the way for being a nice, simple generalist on par with Soldier 76. Probably offense-focused mid-range combat, which is what Overwatch does best, but never mind, because she has shooting that makes her handle like a sniper with all these abilities that have nothing to do with the playstyle of a sniper. Because before even thinking about that, they just wanted to make a rifleman with a big omnic bottom as a companion. Bob, along with Dynamite and a mobility-inclined shotgun, have zero to do with how a sniper should play and approach a game, and feel so tacked on, it's kind of unsurprising that I've seen Ashe players both in quick play and competitive that play Ashe exclusively so that Bob can be summoned every now and again. Because the summon is so much more useful and consistent, but is tied to an unrelated class role like a ball and chain. It's just embarrassing when Jeff Kaplan says that he wasn't expecting mains to be a thing, or says in a Q&A that the class role categories on Hero Select are nothing more than rough guidelines for new players. You are being way too lax about this, and along with combining attack and defense into a single class role called damage because of how many grey areas there were, and changing Symmetra from support to damage because you couldn't justify why she was a support in the first place, that should be leading to absolute scrutiny about how your game was planned, and explains how two tanks get rebalanced to basically not being tanks anymore. This is the headlining act in the world of competitive class-based shooters. And hey, more power to it because it's popular, and to reiterate, is still a fun game of merit. But when you start to piece together how the entire thing was built and how it has a negative effect on the end user, it's just absolutely baffling and puts every issue everyone's had with the game to perspective. And it's all this arsehole's fault. Back in BlizzCon 2017, we had a glance at some early development footage of Overwatch, where we discovered that Tracer was more or less the first in the game, and this aspect of the development has been carried over to this day. If we exclude external rebalances that affected all the heroes at once, Tracer has rarely ever been modified, and I can kinda see why. Mechanically, she's the most raw and simple of the heroes, with a pair of firearms, a sticky mine, and two supplementary movement-based abilities that all mesh together into one playstyle, but there's another reason for it. When looking at aspects like Tracer being one of, if not the first hero, her rarely being changed, her being one of the most competitively viable, and a lot of heroes getting really uncalled for buffs relating to damage and mobility, it has been commonly believed that Tracer is treated by the dev team as the balancing reference point of Overwatch. Essentially, the hypothesis is that she's treated as the most balanced hero, and if another hero is more or less viable than Tracer, that means they're over or underpowered and must be changed as a result to be closer to her characteristics. Now, it's not something I wanted to use as a main jumping point in this video, just because it's not something I can confirm in concrete, but it is true, judging by the treatment of heroes in the game, that the team really like generalists, straightforward power classes that work in all situations, and their attempt to make a roster as diverse as Overwatch's be nothing but generalists shows a lack of understanding on how to balance a game like this. This isn't unconventional, it's just straight up not how it works. The obvious point of note is that not every hero can be balanced around this, because not every hero is like Tracer mechanically, no matter how you rebalance them. Torbjorn is a builder who defends stationary objectives, so why give him a new E ability that increases his speed and fire rate? Mercy is a passive healer with a pistol for emergencies, so why does her reworked ultimate let her fly with infinite ammo? Not only is it concerning enough that Overwatch throws out these drastic knee-jerk reworks that you rarely see in other games, but it makes the whole point of mechanics not complementing a playstyle appear even more apparent. See, a common misconception with game balancing is that if you were to build a tier list of all mechanically different playable characters in a competitive game, that the ideal tier list for a hypothetical perfectly balanced game would look like this. Every character is on the same tier, and every character is useful and viable because the game is just that well balanced and all playable characters are on an equal playing field. Well, that actually can't be any further from the truth in a game like this. Rocket League is an example of the perfectly balanced game, but that's only because there aren't any playable characters or perks and everyone plays exactly the same. Overwatch is a game with offense, defense, tanking, supporting with guns, bows, and wiggly beams of light, so can't really be balanced this way, at least by my assumption. I'm not a game designer, but a much safer option in this kind of game would most likely involve the role a character serves to the game, how frequently they are and should be chosen, if they're a generalist that glues the match together or a specialist that exceeds in a particular role at the cost of being below average at almost everything else, and how detrimental their abilities are in the hands of highly skilled players, which could lead to them being exploited. I think after keeping all those factors in mind, they should then illustrate what is in their mind an ideal tier list and design their playable characters around that. If Tracer is a must pick for DPS in a high-level competitive game because of how she's fundamentally designed, then she could be balanced around the fact that she's going to get picked frequently and consistently. If there's a niche hero who excels in one or more particular areas but isn't that versatile, you might want to focus on making sure she can still carry out that role well within the structure of the game, but you still want to keep them on a niche and comfy area in the bottom tier, as generalist behavior that makes them akin to Tracer could break their playstyle and intrude on the role Tracer brings to the table. Let me elaborate. This point was something that stuck out to me in Uncle Dane's video about problems surrounding the engineer in Team Fortress 2, where his important point front and center is that due to how the engineer is designed, the engineer will never be, and should never be, the best class in TF2. In the video, Dane goes over how as the engineer is a specialist builder with support capabilities that pales in comparison to fighters like Scout and Soldier, his defensive nature has become too much of a focus to rival them, and that him being, quote, a force to be reckoned with is not in his job description. So Dane proceeds to spend the rest of the video proposing changes to counteract that possibility, like the removal of cooperative and stacked engineering, or ideas for items and reworks that could make him more useful as a support class. Dane also presents a rough tier list and shows how there will always be classes who are at the bottom, but that's fine because they're designed to work at the bottom of the tier list, to be the rare pick that's only helpful provided you know how to play them because of how much payoff they bring to the table. Out of Team Fortress 2's 9 classes, Spy is a low-tiered class who's easy to pick off, hard to play as, and the TF team are currently struggling with how to implement him into 6v6 gameplay. But hypothetically buffing him to make him on par with Scout or Soldier, two generalist classes who provide consistent DPS for any situation, just isn't the answer. Because he's a support class that makes use of stealth to destroy buildings and insta-kill targets through headshots and backstabs to assist the team. If Spy was reworked to be more accessible and useful alongside the generalists, not only would Spy lose what makes him unique and alluring to skilled players in the first place, but he just wouldn't be fun to play against, because making stealth and one-hit kill picking accessible and more viable would just lead to further complications. Overwatch takes a one-size-fits-all philosophy a lot of the time by making every hero as accessible as possible with as low a skill ceiling as possible, under the assumption that every hero being as statistically alike to each other counts as being balanced despite every other variable like core mechanics and body proportions. This is a rather controversial stance to take when it comes to Overwatch's changes, but Hanzo's Storm Arrow is easily a much worse ability than the Scatter Arrow balancing-wise, and is the Overwatch equivalent of the Spy problem I mentioned. Because while it makes Hanzo more useful, Storm Arrows are also much easier to use than Scatters, and in exchange generate either the same effect or better, which makes Hanzo more frustrating and far too dominating to play against for his playstyle. Also, Hanzo dominating? Someone's clearly not read enough fanfiction. Personally, I don't think Overwatch's structure of gameplay complements snipers in the first place, so trying to improve them is a lost cause anyway, but despite that, Hanzo, Widowmaker, and Ashe will and should never be highly comp viable heroes in Overwatch to just anyone, because making them more accessible and viable will harm the game at large because of how threatening they are already under a skilled player who can handle their learning curve. Widowmaker may be a meme pick that acts as a one-way ticket to making everyone hate you, but that's because in the right hand she can practically delete people from the map in a single click, so generalist buffs aren't the answer. All it leads to is making high reward much easier to obtain when playing as a sniper, which makes the game more frustrating to play for both highly skilled players who feel they have less to learn and progress in, and less skilled players who are seeing tide-changing events occur way too frequently over the course of a match. By balancing around a generalist attitude while also lacking in mechanical parity, Overwatch is trying to cram everyone into one tier and one role, which just can't work for the foundation it's given itself. Mechanical parity is the most important term I listed there, because it's perfectly fine to make characters unique to each other, to have different classes and playstyles, but you also want to enforce some consistent elements within your characters to prevent the game from being a coding equivalent of a Jenga set. Even when focusing on different playstyles, mechanical equality between those playstyles is basically the apex of things. Oh yeah, Apex Legends! You guys don't mind if I gush about Apex Legends, do you? It's basically been my favourite thing right now.
Oh, there's someone there! There's someone there! He's taking our stuff!
He's taking... Get him! In Apex, the playable legends have three characteristics: the passive ability, the cooldown tactical, and the charged ultimate. And that's it. That's their only variables between each other, except probably hitbox sizes. Yeah, you should probably get around to fixing that respawn. What this means is that in every other facet of Apex Legends, they are equal. Health pool, movement speed, even the weapons they can use are all exactly the same. And after piling a few hours into the game, I firmly believe that Apex doesn't have a single legend that's over or underpowered because everyone's equal enough on the playing field at their core. Victory isn't determined by who can press Q the fastest, it's by gunning down everything that gets in your way. Lifeline's still a healer, Pathfinder's still a scout, and Wraith's still a flanker, but they can all snipe down a redeployment and kick him square in the jaw without any rock, paper, scissors bullshit determining the encounters by default.
Oh.
I love this game so much. I'd even go as far as to say that team composition is an element of Apex to pull off specific strategies, but it's not a necessity, and you're completely fine with picking a character at random regardless of your teammate's choice. And fun fact, I think this is also the reason why Apex Legends is a significantly less toxic and frustrating game to play. Like, yeah, you might get paired with that one fucking Mirage main who picks nothing but Mirage, but at least you'll be able to restrain yourself from yelling at him until after the match when he refuses to res you or has 2 Mozambiques in his inventory. Mirage is pretty damn hot though, you gotta admit. And one could argue that making the characters this similar defeats the purpose of a class-based shooter because different mechanics and playstyles are the entire point, but Apex is able to enforce different strategies and playstyles for each character regardless of its level of parity. It's mostly down to the fact that every unique class ability is built as a utility that requires being used correctly to give the upper hand, rather than a key binding that deletes players from the map. And having their own situations and skill ceilings means that no matter which legend you pick, you'll always meet the trade-off of not using another. Like, yeah, Lifeline could be filled with ultimate accelerant so she can call care packages frequently and you can get some rare stuff, but if you don't get a Pathfinder, you won't be able to grapple to a vantage point late game, or what if you don't have a Wraith that'll escort you to a flank route? Even the ultimate abilities that sound deletey, like Bangalore and Gibraltar's airstrikes, are designed in a supplementary manner because they're not effective at getting kills at all, but they are useful for creating a panic to either escape or draw a group out of hiding. And by the end of that combat encounter, it all falls down to how a player uses the movement abilities and gunplay that's completely detached from the characters they chose. And it feels like even years through the game's life cycle, there will be more things to learn and experience with due to the hands-off approach of the mechanics. Okay, I'm done now.
It's not EA's fault. That's the date
EA
Respawn decided.
bad, Joe.
EA bad! Gaming circle jerk. Women aren't real.
Women are a liberal myth.
I get it. Overwatch is hard to balance because there are a lot of heroes, but you made them with different weapons, health pools, armor pools, movement speeds, jump heights, body proportions, head hitbox locations and sizes, and even ability amounts. Not everyone in Overwatch's roster even has a passive, and there was even a point in the game where Symmetra had 2 ultimates. So ignoring the fact that you could have just stopped developing more heroes after suddenly deciding to make an assassin class in a game that really does not complement stealth, it's not the only issue here. It's because not even the team know what they want, and they don't know what their end goal is to correctly balance the game. They just want everyone to stop yelling at them, which is why most balancing changes have occurred from knee-jerk community response rather than their own initiative or referring to their own planned designs. It's no wonder whenever a new hero gets introduced, they're either broken or piddling away, because they just have no idea, and they're wondering why a horse with a bongo drum isn't playing exactly like a lesbian with a chip sarnie. And that's just what I believe is the central primary flaw of Overwatch, and I think I've said enough. Even if we went into detail about other stuff like the map design, a mishmash of choky corridors that kill the pacing and make defending much too easy. To this day, I'm still upset that of all the maps in the game, the team thought Horizon was the one that needed reworking instead of actual garbage like Temple of Anubis. Like, yeah, everyone said defending on Horizon was difficult, but that's only because you made your player base so used to choky corridors where the defending team doesn't have to do anything. So that's another can of worms that I think contributes to the game's everlasting problems. After a few years of bashing my head at a keyboard, Overwatch feels like a fun and unique game, but under the microscope feels doomed from the start, which makes falling out of it even more depressing. And I mean, yeah, other multiplayer shooters praised for their systems didn't start out amazingly from the get-go. TF2 made some mistakes, that's for damn sure. But at the same time, TF2 didn't try to be an esport the moment it came out, and was at the very least given enough of a framework to improve from there. Like my Rayark video, this is something I'm talking about from love, because clearly I would not be making something like this if I hadn't sunk God knows what into the game. But it's just disappointing now. Not only have all my friends stopped playing because every Discord call would just end with frustrated sighs before hanging up. But if all eyes are on Overwatch, this means nobody notices that anything is wrong, especially considering the fact that so many of the game's player base likely haven't played an online shooter of this caliber before, so they're not able to notice shaky elements like inconsistent game mechanics or bad map design, or why stuns, pushes, and other CC mechanics in shooters are an objectively bad idea that adds nothing to the game other than frustrate players. We learned over a decade ago that stuns are bad to the point of most instances of competitive TF2 banning stun weaponry. Stop putting stuns in your shooters, it is actual bad game design. And that could lead to a worst case scenario where Overwatch starts setting a standard and we end up going backwards with the progression of the genre. You've got nuggets of excellence buried under this game, Blizzard. And I'm still dripping with excitement of what you're going to show us next in the years to come. But if you decide to make another online competitive shooter, my feedback as a customer is simply this: ditch the rocket dude and make more than one size. Thanks.
I'll be Tracer.
I'm already Tracer.
What about Widowmaker?
I'm already Widowmaker.
I'll be Bastion.
Nerf Bastion.
You're right, so Winston.
I wanna be Winston.
I guess I'll be Genji.
I'm already Genji.
Then I'll be McCree.
I already chose McCree.
I have an idea.